Commander James Torres sat in the dark control room of the space station, watching the stars drift slowly past the massive viewing window. It was supposed to be a quiet night shift. He had planned to finish his coffee, maybe read through some old reports and get some rest before the morning briefing. But then the alarm came. The distress signal cut through the silence like a knife. It was old technology, the kind used by alien ships from the outer regions. James leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he read the incoming data. A vessel was in trouble and it was heading toward his station fast. "Get a team together," he told his communications officer, a young man named David. "We're going in for a rescue." 20 minutes later, James was suited up and moving through the docking bay with 5 of his best crew members. Their suits were thick and heavy, designed to protect them against almost anything. They didn't know what they were walking into, but that was part of the job. In space you never really knew what you'd find. The damaged ship hung in the black like a broken bird. Its hull was scorched and cracked in several places. Warning lights blinked on and off across its surface. As James's team moved inside through the emergency airlock, they could feel the ship shaking slightly. Something was wrong with its engines. Something was very wrong. The cargo bay was where they met them. 3 figures stood waiting, and James had to remind himself to keep breathing. They were like nothing he had ever seen before. They were tall, maybe 8 feet high, and their bodies seemed to be made of something that looked like glass or crystal. Light moved through them in strange ways. Their faces were almost human-like, with eyes and mouths, but everything about them felt alien and strange. Their skin seemed to glow from the inside. The leader stepped forward. She was female, James could tell that much, and her crystalline body shimmered with colors of blue and purple. Her name, she told him through the radio, was Kestrel. And she was terrified. "Commander Torres," she said, her voice shaking badly. "Thank you for coming. We need your help, but not in the way you think." James kept his hand near his weapon just in case. He had been trained for first contact situations, but this felt different. This felt urgent. This felt like fear. "What do you need?" James asked carefully. Kestrel's whole body seemed to shake. "There are people looking for us. Bad people. People from my world. They want something we have. Something we have been protecting. You must understand, if they find us, if they find what we carry, they will take it. And if they take it, it will be the end of everything." James had heard stories like this before. Refugees, treasure, contraband. He had heard them all. But something about the way Kestrel spoke made him listen harder. This wasn't about money or power. This was about survival. "Show me," James said. Kestrel led him deeper into the ship, through narrow corridors that hummed with failing power. Other crew members of her kind watched them pass, their crystal bodies reflecting the emergency lights. They looked sad. They looked scared. They looked like they were saying goodbye to something. Finally, they reached a chamber that was different from the rest of the ship. It was stronger, made of thick metal and covered in special cooling systems. The temperature inside was cold, almost freezing. And inside, on a special pad that glowed with heat, was something impossible. Was a dragon. James had read about dragons in old Earth books when he was a child. They were creatures of fire and myth, things that never really existed. But here in front of him was a real one. It was small, though no bigger than a human baby. Its scales were beautiful. They shimmered between gold and deep red, like fire frozen in time. Its wings were folded against its body, and its eyes were closed. It was breathing but barely. It looked sick or hurt or both. "This is Babloo," Kestrel whispered, and there was so much love in her voice. "He's the last of his kind. My people found him years ago, and we have been keeping him safe ever since. We have been hiding him from the Empire, from the government that rules my world." James couldn't look away from the creature. "What? What do they want with him?" Kestrel's voice became hard, angry. "They want to use him. They want to study him, to understand what makes him special, to turn his kind into weapons. Long ago, dragons were powerful. They had abilities that could change battles, that could shake worlds. My people hunted them to nothing. Now only Babloo remains. If the Empire gets him, they will kill him trying to unlock his secrets. They will destroy the last dragon in existence." James felt something shift inside his chest. He had spent his whole life following rules, following orders, doing what the government told him to do. But standing here, looking at this tiny, helpless creature, he realized that sometimes rules didn't matter. Sometimes what mattered was doing what was right. "You want me to hide him," James said. "I want you to save him," Kestrel replied. James took a breath. This was crazy. This would destroy his career. This could start a war. But he looked at Babloo, at this last dragon, and he knew what he had to do. "Get him ready," James said. "We're taking him to my station." and we'll figure out the rest as we go. 2 weeks had passed since they brought Babloo to the station. 14 days of hiding a dragon on a human space facility, and nobody had found out. James knew it wouldn't last forever, but for now it was working. And more importantly, something unexpected was happening. James found himself walking down to the lower levels of the station during his breaks. He would skip meals with the other officers. He would ignore his paperwork. He would make excuses to leave meetings early. All because he wanted to spend time with a small golden dragon that wasn't supposed to exist. The creature's quarters were in an old storage room that James had converted into something more comfortable. He had installed heating lamps and cooling systems. He had brought in soft blankets and safety padding. He had turned it into a home, really. And Babloo had turned it into something that surprised everyone. The dragon had grown. Not much, but enough that you could see it week to week. He was now about the size of a large dog, maybe the size of a German shepherd. But that was where the comparison to Earth animals ended. Everything else about him was still completely alien, completely magical. And his personality had come alive like the sun rising after a long night. The moment James walked through the door, Babloo would make this chirping sound, high and happy and full of excitement. It was like nothing James had ever heard before. It sounded like joy. The little dragon would scramble across the floor, his claws clicking against the metal, and he would jump up against James's legs, his tail wagging back and forth like a puppy's. "Hey buddy," James would say, reaching down to scratch behind Babloo's horns. The dragon seemed to love that. He would close his eyes and make this rumbling sound deep in his chest, like a purr, but richer and deeper. But Babloo was learning. Every single day he was learning something new. James had bought toys for him, balls that bounced, objects that floated, things that made sounds. At first, Babloo had just stared at them. But then, slowly he had figured out what they were for. He would chase a light reflection across the wall for hours, diving and jumping, his wings fluttering in ways that made James's heart jump because he was scared the dragon would hurt himself. The dragon had also discovered something that made James laugh harder than he had laughed in months: the supply cabinet in his quarters. James kept dried fruit in there. Nothing fancy, just some apple slices and mango pieces that he liked to snack on during his shifts. One morning he came back to his room to find Babloo with his head stuck in the cabinet, munching on dried apples like it was the best thing he had ever tasted. "You little thief," James had said, laughing. "How did you even figure that out?" Babloo had just looked at him, his mouth full of apple, and his tail had wagged innocently. After that, James started leaving pieces of fruit out for him on purpose. It became their thing. Every evening, James would come down with a few dried mango pieces, and Babloo would do his happy chirp and jump around in circles. But it was Dr. Rebecca Hayes who first noticed something deeper was happening. Rebecca was the station's chief scientist. She was smart, serious, and dedicated to understanding how things worked. She was also one of the only people James had told about Babloo. One morning, she found James asleep in one of the chairs in the dragon's quarters, and Babloo was curled up against his chest, the dragon's head resting on James's shoulder. "You're getting attached," Rebecca said simply, setting down her medical scanner. James woke up, careful not to disturb the sleeping dragon. "Someone has to care for him," he said. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. She knew him well enough to know that wasn't the real answer. But she didn't push it. Instead, she started running tests on Babloo. Every day she would come down with her equipment and scan the dragon from head to tail. And every day her expression became more confused, more amazed. "His brain activity is incredible," she told James one afternoon, staring at her data. "I mean, it's off the charts. Whatever Babloo is, he's not just an animal responding to things around him. He's actually thinking. He's processing information. He's learning." "What do you mean learning?" James asked, though he was starting to suspect. "I mean he's learning language," Rebecca said. "His neural patterns match the patterns we see in species that use complex communication. He's listening to us talk and he's understanding it. Not all of it, but pieces. He's intelligent, James. Really intelligent." James wasn't surprised anymore. He had already known that. Every day with Babloo made it more obvious. The dragon watched people carefully. He observed their movements. He seemed to understand moods and feelings. When James was sad, Babloo would come and sit next to him quietly. When James was happy, the dragon would celebrate with him. Meanwhile, the messages from the Empire kept coming. At first they were polite. Diplomatic requests to return the dragon to its proper owners. Then they became less polite. Then they became threats. The station received demands, ultimatums, angry messages written in harsh language. The Empire wanted Babloo back and they weren't going to wait forever. But James's crew had made a silent agreement. Nobody would say anything. Nobody would report Babloo's location. They had all seen the dragon. They had all felt what James felt. And they had decided that protecting this small creature was more important than following orders. One night, about 2 weeks after Babloo's arrival, James was sitting in the dark of the dragon's quarters, just listening to the sound of his own breathing and the soft rumble of the station around them. Babloo crawled up into his lap the way he always did. The dragon was getting bigger, but he was still small enough to fit. Then Babloo opened his mouth, and instead of a chirp or a rumble, he made a different sound. Therese. It was clumsy and broken, and the pronunciation wasn't quite right. But it was unmistakable. It was James's name. Babloo had just said his name. James's throat tightened. His eyes burned. He put his face against the dragon's head and just held him, understanding in that moment that everything had changed. This wasn't just a mission anymore. This wasn't just hiding a refugee. This was something deeper. This was love. Rebecca's lab was quiet except for the hum of machines and the soft beeping of scanners. James stood in the doorway watching as the doctor pulled up files on her main display. She had been studying Babloo for 2 weeks now, running tests every single day. He could tell from her expression that she had found something important. "Sit down," Rebecca said without looking at him. James pulled up a chair. He had a feeling he knew what was coming, but hearing it would make it real. Hearing it would change everything. Rebecca turned to face him, and her eyes were serious. "He's sapient," she said flatly. No hesitation. No softening the blow. Just the truth delivered like a punch to the stomach. His consciousness patterns match human standards for sentience. His brain is working the way an intelligent being's brain works. James, they're not hunting an animal. They're committing genocide. The words hung in the air between them. James had known this in his heart. He had felt it every time Babloo looked at him. He had understood it when the dragon said his name. But knowing something and having a scientist prove it with data were two completely different things. Knowing something meant you could tell yourself you might be wrong. But having it proven meant there was no escaping the truth anymore. "How certain are you?" James asked quietly. "Completely certain," Rebecca said. She pulled up the scans, showing him the complex patterns of neural activity in Babloo's brain. "Look at this. This is consciousness. This is self-awareness. This is thought. His brain structure is different from ours, but the function is the same. He thinks. He feels. He understands. He's a person, James. Not an animal. A person." James sat in silence for a long time. He thought about Babloo learning his name. He thought about the dragon understanding moods and emotions. He thought about the gentle, curious way Babloo approached the world. "If the Empire knows this," James said slowly, "if they know Babloo is intelligent and they still want him for weapons research, then they're committing genocide," Rebecca finished. "Killing an entire species on purpose. Erasing consciousness itself from the universe. It's not just hunting. It's not just cruelty. It's mass murder." James stood up and walked to the window. He could see the stars out there, endless and cold. Somewhere out there were more dragons. There had to be. Babloo couldn't be the only one left. And the ZYX Empire wanted to destroy them all. "This changes everything," James said. "It does," Rebecca agreed. That evening everything fell apart. James was in his quarters when the communication system lit up. He answered to see Captain Linda Morrison's face on his screen. She was from Earth Command, from the Judicial Fleet, the military branch that handled major violations of protocol. She didn't look happy. "Commander Torres," she said, her voice cold and official. "We have received reports of illegal activity on your station. Specifically, harboring an alien creature without proper authorization, maintaining that creature in violation of quarantine protocols, and refusing to report its presence to higher command. I'm giving you one chance to do the right thing. Stand down. Surrender the creature immediately. Or I will remove you from command, place you under arrest, and take the creature by force." James's heart was pounding. This was it. This was the moment where he had to choose between his career and his conscience. "No," he said simply. Captain Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" I said no. "I'm not surrendering him. Commander, you are in direct violation of 17 different protocols. This is insubordination. This is mutiny. Stand down or face court-martial and imprisonment." James looked right at the camera, right at her face on the screen. "That's not insubordination," he said quietly. "That's conscience." Then he cut the transmission. The silence that followed was complete. For a moment, James just sat there, staring at the blank screen. He had just defied Earth Command. He had just made himself a criminal. There was no going back now. Rebecca appeared at his door less than 5 minutes later, her expression worried. "What now?" she asked. James took a deep breath. "Now we find his people," he said. "If Babloo's species survived, if there's anywhere in this galaxy where dragons still live, we find them. We get Babloo home to his own kind. And we expose what the HFY theory has been doing. We show the whole galaxy that they're committing genocide." "That's a lot to do," Rebecca said, sitting down across from him. "I know," James replied. "But we're going to do it anyway." They started making plans. Rebecca used her access to search old databases for references to dragons, to Babloo's species. They looked for old surveys, old reports, anything that might give them a clue about where the dragon's people might be hiding. David, the communications officer, started using his skills to search through encrypted files and hidden records. Other crew members began gathering supplies and preparing a ship. It was dangerous. It was illegal. It could get them all killed or imprisoned for the rest of their lives. But it was the right thing to do. That night, James went down to Babloo's quarters. The dragon was sleeping, curled up on his favorite blanket. James sat down carefully next to him and Babloo woke up, his eyes blinking open. The dragon stretched and crawled into James's lap the way he always did. "We're going to get you home," James whispered. "I promise you that. No matter what happens to me, I'm going to make sure you get back to your people." Babloo seemed to understand. The dragon lifted his head and made that soft, broken sound again. "Therese." James pulled him close. "I've got you, buddy," he whispered. "I've got you." Outside the station, the universe waited. Somewhere out there was danger, was discovery, was the chance that everything James was doing would fail. But right here, in this moment, holding a small dragon that the Empire wanted to destroy, James knew he was doing the only thing that mattered. He was choosing to be human in the truest sense of the word. He was choosing to protect the innocent. He was choosing what was right over what was safe. And there was no turning back. 3 months. That's how long it took to find them. 3 months of James and his team searching through old databases, looking at ancient star charts, following hints and clues that had been buried for decades. The HFY theory had records of everything. They kept detailed files on their hunts, their conquests, their discoveries. But they had also kept records of places they wanted to forget. Places they had decided were worthless. Dead ends. That's where James found the answer. There was a star system marked in the oldest files, labeled as checked and cleared, from nearly 100 years ago. A solar system with 5 planets, hidden behind a thick nebula that made it hard to scan from a distance. The HFY theory had visited it once, found nothing valuable and moved on. They had never gone back. "It has to be there," Rebecca said, studying the old records. "If dragons survived, if there was a refuge, this is where it would be. Somewhere the HFY theory didn't think was worth protecting." James gathered his small team, Rebecca, David, and 3 other crew members who had proven they could be trusted. They didn't have a large ship, just a fast scout vessel that could move through space without drawing too much attention. They loaded it with supplies, with Babloo safely secured in a special chamber, and they left the station without permission. Behind them, Earth Command was probably issuing more arrest warrants. The HFY theory empire was probably demanding their location. But James didn't care anymore. He had already chosen his path. Now he was going to walk it to the end. The journey took weeks. They had to be careful, moving slowly, hiding their energy signatures so no one would track them. Babloo grew restless in his chamber, missing the freedom of the station. James would spend hours sitting with him, talking to the dragon, keeping him calm. He told Babloo stories about his family back on Earth, about the oceans and mountains and forests. He told him about the things humans loved and the reasons they fought for what was right. "We're going to take you home," James would whisper. "To your real home. To your own kind." And Babloo would make that soft chirping sound as if he understood. Then one day they found it. The sensors picked up the nebula first, a massive cloud of gas and dust swirling in space like a living thing. As they moved through it, the instruments started detecting life signs. Lots of them. And they weren't human signatures. They weren't HFY theory. They were dragon signatures. Heat patterns that matched Babloo's biology exactly. "We're seeing them," David said from the communication station, his voice shaking with excitement. "Multiple large thermal signatures. Multiple smaller ones. It's a whole population. They're alive. They're all alive." James felt something break open in his chest. Babloo wasn't alone. His species hadn't been wiped out. There was a place where dragons still flew and lived and existed as they were meant to. "Plot a course," James said. "Full approach. And get Babloo ready." But while James's team was finding Babloo's people, something else was happening across the galaxy. James had known that he couldn't hide forever. He had known that eventually someone would ask questions. So before he left the station, he had given Rebecca something important: all of his evidence. Every record of the HFY Stories hunts. Every report of murdered dragons. Every file that proved the Empire had been systematically trying to commit genocide. Rebecca had taken that evidence and sent it to the Galactic Council. The Galactic Council was a gathering of representatives from dozens of species. They met on a neutral station to discuss laws and treaties and the big decisions that affected everyone in known space. They were supposed to be the keepers of justice, the ones who made sure no one species got too powerful or too cruel. When Rebecca's evidence arrived, it created an earthquake. The first species to step forward was the Valorians, tall, elegant beings who had been oppressed by the HFY Story for centuries. They had stories to tell. Stories of their people being hunted, their lands being taken, their children being used for labor. Then the merchants of Proxima spoke. They had suffered too. The HFY Story had stolen from them, enslaved them, destroyed their colonies. One by one, species after species began to share their painful histories. The HFY Story Empire wasn't just hunting dragons. They had a pattern of conquest and cruelty that stretched back generations. Then a young woman stood up to speak. Her name was Monica Williams, and she was Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council. She was young, only in her 30s, but she carried herself with the kind of strength that came from knowing you were right. She looked around the room at all the different alien species gathered there, and she began to speak. "Humanity is new to the stars," she said, her voice calm and clear. "We only arrived here a few years ago. We're still learning how things work. We're still trying to understand the rules and the politics and the complicated history of all these different worlds. But there's one thing we understand better than anything else, because it's written into who we are. We understand this: a sentient being's life has value. Not because they're useful. Not because they're powerful or rich or have something to offer. A life has value because it exists. Because it thinks and feels and experiences the universe. Because it matters." The entire room had gone silent. Everyone was listening. The HFY Story forgot that, Monica continued. Or maybe they never believed it in the first place. They hunted dragons, intelligent beings, conscious creatures, and they tried to destroy them completely. They were committing genocide. And they would have succeeded except for one man. Commander James Torres. One human who understood that protecting an innocent life was more important than following orders. More important than his career. More important than his safety. He chose to be human in the truest sense. And now the galaxy has a choice. Do we stand with him? Do we stand with the victims of the HFY Story? Or do we stand with an empire that hunts intelligent beings to extinction? She let that question hang in the air. Then she stepped back and sat down. For a long moment, nothing happened. The room was completely silent. Different species looked at each other, communicating in ways humans couldn't see, through glances, through subtle gestures, through whatever connections they had with each other. Then the Valorians stood up and cast their vote. Against the HFY Story Empire. Then the merchants of Proxima stood. Against them. Then another species. And another. And another. By the end of the vote, it was almost unanimous. The HFY Story Empire was condemned. They were sanctioned, cut off from trade, isolated from the rest of galactic society. Their power was broken, not by military force, but by the united voice of every other species saying, "We will not stand with you. We will not support you. We will not allow you to commit genocide." And it had all started because one man had chosen to protect one small dragon. Back on the ship approaching the dragon's sanctuary, James didn't know any of this yet. But Babloo seemed to sense something. The dragon was moving in his chamber, excited, his tail swishing back and forth. He could smell his own kind. He could feel them in the way only a dragon could. "It's time," James whispered. "It's time to go home." And as the ship broke through the nebula, revealing a hidden world of mountains and forests and open skies where dragons soared through the air, James understood that he had done something impossible. He had changed the galaxy. Not through weapons or power, but through choosing to be human. Through choosing what was right. The trial chamber was cold and formal, with high ceilings and stone walls that made every sound echo. James stood in the center of the room, surrounded by military judges in their official uniforms. They had been deliberating for weeks about what to do with him. He had violated every protocol they had. He had defied direct orders. He had stolen a military vessel. He had harbored an alien creature. He had committed treason against Earth Command itself. According to military law, the punishment should have been simple. Prison. Execution possibly. The end of everything James had worked for his entire life. The lead judge, an older man named Colonel Richard Peterson, opened the verdict. His face was grim as he began reading the charges. One by one, the violations were listed. One by one, James listened to the words that were going to destroy him. On the charge of insubordination, the colonel said, "The court finds the defendant." James braced himself. But then something happened that stopped everyone in the room. The doors opened. A figure stepped through, tall, elegant, with skin that seemed to shimmer with inner light. It was a Valorian delegate. Behind her came 3 more Valorians, and then representatives from the merchants of Proxima, their 4 arms folded across their chests in a gesture of respect and authority. "Colonel Peterson," the lead Valorian said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "The Valorian Alliance petitions for clemency for Commander James Torres. This human did what our people could not. He protected the innocent when it was dangerous to do so. We ask that you spare his life." The colonel looked stunned. Before he could respond, more delegates entered the chamber. Species James had never even heard of. Aliens he didn't have names for, with bodies made of light or crystal or things that defied description. One by one they came forward to speak for him. A being made entirely of glowing energy spoke about how James had shown them that sacrifice could still exist in the universe. A crystalline creature from the outer reaches explained that James had proven humans were capable of moral courage. A merchant species from beyond the known systems told the court that James had reminded them why laws and ethics mattered in the first place. By the time they finished, there were representatives from over 30 different species standing in that trial chamber, all of them asking for James to be spared. All of them standing beside a human they barely knew, defending him because he had done what was right. Colonel Peterson looked at the assembled delegates. He looked at James. Then he looked down at the verdict he had written, and James watched him make a decision that changed everything. "The charges," the colonel said slowly, "are hereby reduced. Commander James Torres will not face imprisonment or execution. However, he is stripped of his rank and discharged from Earth Command effective immediately." James's heart sank. They were still destroying his career. But then the colonel continued. "However," he said, "given the unprecedented support from the Galactic Council and the unanimous petition from allied species, Earth Command has decided to create a new position. The position of cultural liaison to the galactic community. This position will be filled by Commander," he paused, "by James Torres. Your mission will be to represent humanity's values and principles to the wider galaxy. You will be the bridge between our world and theirs." The room erupted. Delegates were cheering. Some made sounds that weren't quite cheers but were clearly celebrations in their own way. James stood there, stunned, realizing that he hadn't lost everything. He had lost his old life, yes. But he had been given something new. Something that mattered more. The trial was over. James Torres was free. But the greatest moment came later that week. James received a message from Babloo's species. It came through the official diplomatic channels, signed with a mark that looked like a dragon's claw. The message was short, but it carried weight that James felt in his bones. "Commander James Torres, Protector of Dragons, is hereby granted honorary citizenship of the Dragon Sanctuary. You are family. You are home. You are one of us." James read that message 3 times and he cried every time. 2 days later, James made his final visit to the space station he had called home for so long. He had come to say goodbye. He had come to pick up Babloo. The dragon was in his quarters and James barely recognized him. Babloo had grown. Not just bigger but transformed. The tiny creature that had arrived as a fragile refugee was now a full-grown dragon. His wings were enormous, beautiful, with edges that seemed to catch starlight itself. His horns spiraled upward in curves of pearl and gold. His scales shimmered with colors that James couldn't quite name. They seemed to shift between reds and golds and deep purples, like fire captured in solid form. But his eyes were the same. Those ancient, intelligent, loving eyes. "Come on," James said softly. "It's time to go home." He led Babloo to the observation deck, the same place where James had first watched the stars when he arrived at this station. Now he was leaving it, with a dragon at his side and a new purpose ahead of him. They stood together, looking out at the vast darkness of space. Somewhere out there was the Dragon Sanctuary, hidden behind the nebula. Somewhere out there were Babloo's people waiting for him. Somewhere out there was a whole new life. "Your family is waiting for you," James said softly. Babloo turned to face him, and James saw everything in those eyes. He saw gratitude. He saw love. He saw the bond that had formed between them, a bond that crossed species and worlds and understanding itself. The dragon stepped forward and pressed his forehead against James's chest, a gesture that somehow transcended all language, All species, all difference. It was goodbye. James held the dragon for a long moment, feeling the warmth of Babloo's body against his, feeling the beating of that ancient heart. He thought about everything that had happened. How a simple act of kindness had changed everything. How protecting one innocent life had altered the course of galactic history. Then James stepped back. Go, he whispered. Go home. Babloo spread his wings. They were magnificent, easily 30 feet across, powerful and strong and beautiful. The dragon moved to the edge of the observation platform and looked out at the stars. Then he looked back at James one more time, and James thought he saw something like a smile in that dragon's expression. Then Babloo jumped. For one heart-stopping moment, James thought the dragon would fall. But then those wings caught the air currents flowing through the station and Babloo rose. He climbed higher and higher, his body silhouetted against the stars. He circled once, twice, 3 times, and James knew he was saying goodbye. He was taking one last look at the place where he had found safety, where he had found friendship, where he had found a human who cared about him enough to change the world. Then Babloo turned toward the distant stars, toward home, toward his people. His wings beat powerfully, and the dragon accelerated faster and faster, until he was nothing but a speck of light against the darkness. And then he was gone. James stood there for a long time, watching the empty space where Babloo had disappeared. His eyes were wet, but he was smiling. Because he had done it. He had saved one small dragon, and in doing so he had changed everything. Humanity had come to the stars looking for conquest. They had come looking for resources and power and ways to expand their territory. Instead, they had found something better. They had found their own humanity. They had learned that the value of a life isn't measured in how useful it is or how powerful it is. It's measured in the simple fact that it exists. That it thinks and feels and experiences joy and sorrow just like any human does. James thought about Monica Williams standing before the Galactic Council, defending him. He thought about the Valorians and the merchants and all the other species who had stepped forward to say that what he did mattered. He thought about a small dragon learning to say his name, and a full-grown dragon pressing its forehead against his chest in gratitude. And he smiled. Humanity had been given a gift among the stars. They had been given the chance to be more than conquerors and explorers. They had been given the chance to be protectors. To be the species that chose conscience over convenience. To be the ones who understood that all sentient life had value. And the galaxy would never forget it. James Torres turned away from the observation window and walked back into the station, toward whatever future awaited him. Behind him, somewhere in the vast darkness of space, a dragon flew home. And humanity's place in the cosmos had been forever changed. Not by weapons or technology or power, but by one man's choice to do what was right. The end.